I'm the Refugee Ministry Coordinator for the ARP Church, and specifically I work for Outreach North America.
Fantastic. And Eleanor's helped us at the bookstore to get a book called Seeking Refuge on the Shores of the Global Refugee Crisis, and by Ballman, Sorens, and Smear. And the opening paragraph says this: today, an estimated 60 million people worldwide have been forcibly displaced from their homes, a number larger than any time in recorded history. While many remain within the borders of their country, about 20 million individuals have been forced by persecution to escape. Seeking refuge in a neighbor land, more than half of those refugees are children. Half are children? Is that, wow.
Correct. Over half are under the age of 18. So one of the long-term implications of a refugee crisis this big is not just that it's changing where people live, but I mean, if you think about it, that's an entire generation of students who don't have access to adequate education.
Okay, Ellen, I'm gonna get you to help me, because I gotta admit to you, I've been raised in the South, and you can tell by my Southern accent. But I'm just curious in what you're saying. Help me out a little bit. What are refugees? Who are refugees is probably the way I should.
It's a great question. It's a term that gets used a lot. Sometimes it is used inaccurately, actually, so it's helpful to define our terms. A refugee is somebody who has been forced out of their home country and they can't go back because of violence or persecution. And that violence or persecution has to be because of their race, their religion, their nationality, political opinion, or social group. So that means people who have fled home because of a natural disaster don't qualify as refugees. It means people who are living in extreme poverty and want to find better jobs don't qualify as refugees. They have to be out of their home country because of persecution.
And can't go back.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they would love to go back if they can, but most of them will never have that opportunity.
Wow. And I hear a lot about immigrants. So what would you say, are refugees and immigrants the same thing?
There are two different categories, really. There's a lot of overlap, but in general, when we refer to an immigrant, we're talking about someone who chooses to move to a new country. And that could be for a lot of different reasons. It could be because of family. It could be for economic reasons, or searching for freedom. But refugees are people who have been forced to move. They didn't want to do that, but they had to. And so they also have a lot of trauma that they've been through. Almost, across the board, refugees have some of the highest rates of post-traumatic stress disorder of the worldwide population. And so there's a lot of hurt and a lot of need that comes with being a refugee too.
Well, where are the refugees mainly coming from? It's 2019, February. Where are these refugees mainly coming from?
That's a great question. A lot of them are coming from the Middle East, and what you see on the news will almost always be about the ones from the Middle East. But actually, one of the largest refugee crises right now is actually in the country of Burma or Myanmar. And thousands and thousands of Rohingya refugees and others have fled from their home country of Burma across the border into Bangladesh because of genocide at the hands of their own government. So many refugees are in Southeast Asia. Some are coming out of places like Syria in the Middle East, and there are many, many refugees in Africa as well, especially coming out of the Sudan and South Sudan areas.
I don't think we hear a lot about this as far as our, through the news and things. So any particular reason you think why we don't hear this, the call to help, what's going on?
Yeah. Wait, can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, I'll stop it here.
Sorry.
I pause. Eleanor, one question that I have for you is this. How do refugees get to the United States? Now, we've talked about the problem in their different countries and they're not able to come back. How do they get here, and what are we doing as American citizens?
Yeah, so when a refugee leaves their homeland, and again, that's part of the definition is that they're outside of their home country. So they usually run to the nearest safe place they can get to, which would be a country bordering theirs. And that's the beginning of a very, very long and complicated refugee journey. Actually, most refugees wait years, if not decades, for some sort of solution to their problem. Some of them eventually will be able to return home. Some of them will kind of be integrated into that country that they first flee to. But many of them will spend years or decades just in limbo. And when they're in that state, they're kind of living in a country where they're allowed to be, but they're not allowed to work. Most of them don't have education for their kids, and so they really don't have a hope for a future. But in that country, they will register with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UNHCR. And if the UNHCR reviews their case and determines that they are in fact refugees and they meet that international definition of a refugee as someone who's fled violence or persecution, then they're given refugee status. And that's really their only hope of being resettled to a third country. So as it is right now, there are more than 25 million men, women, and children who are refugees, and less than 1% of them will ever be resettled to a third country. And right now, the United States is accepting a maximum of 30,000 refugees per year. So when refugees come to the US, it's a very different situation than what we see in Europe, for example, because there's an ocean between us and Africa, or between us and the Middle East, right? So in Europe, you have thousands and thousands of people who we call asylum seekers, and that's kind of their first stop, and they're hoping for safety. Most of them have not been vetted at that time, and they're just there hoping for a solution. But when refugees come to the United States, it's after an extensive process that involves both the United Nations and the United States State Department and FBI and Department of Homeland Security, doing extensive interviews, even biometric scans and health screenings and cultural orientations. So when refugees come, they're invited by the US government to be here, and they're legal to work from the day that they arrive.
Excellent. Now let me ask you this: as far as the local church goes, how can the local church actually help in this ministry with refugees?
Thanks for asking that, because that's my job, is to get people to ask that question and to help them figure out answers. And, I think as we look at scripture, and maybe we can come back to this in a minute, but it's very clear in scripture that God cares very much for vulnerable people. And there are few people more vulnerable than refugees who have already experienced a lot of violence and trauma, and then they're being brought to a new country. And as they come, they are so grateful to be here. They're just so thankful to the United States for giving them a chance to live a safe life and provide the basic needs that their family has. But they're also just completely overwhelmed by a new language, by a new culture, by being away from their community and a network of family and friends. And so the biggest needs that they have, in addition to just physical needs, is actually community, and they need friendship. And so that's a really great opportunity for the church in the U.S. just to reach out and love to the people who are in our communities, who may have come from anywhere in the world but are now in our own cities and our own neighborhoods, to simply love them as friends. And just like you would help me, Brent, if I needed something, I can come to you and ask for help, to be able to do that for someone who's new to the United States.
Excellent. Now,
that's what Refugee Ministry is at its most basic level.
Excellent. That's a great answer that you had. Hey, one thing that I was thinking about was this. I'm at a local church, and I buy what you're saying. I need help. Our church needs to really do refugee ministry. How do we know who are refugees? Do you go to the government building? Where would you go?
That's a great question as well. One, I would say I would love to help you with that. That's part of my job, is to help you find who's in your area and how. And so you can contact me, and I'd love to help you. Another thing that's just generally helpful is to Google refugees near, and then put your city in. As refugees come, again, they're invited by the US government, but their cases are managed by groups called resettlement agencies. So there's 9 major resettlement agencies. One of them, just for example, is World Relief. And so they receive grant funding to help refugees get here. They arrange their travel. They provide housing for them for the first few months and that sort of thing. But there's always going to be an agency that is the one kind of controlling the case of the refugee as they come in. And so looking for a refugee resettlement agency near you is the best way to find out about refugees nearby.
Well, help me out a little bit also. Do you know a church that is doing refugee ministry well? What does it look like? What are the benefits? Would love to know that.
Yeah. So the first example that comes to mind is actually my own church, which is here in Greenville, South Carolina. And Greenville is a little bit of a unique situation because it's a smaller city than where most refugees are initially resettled. When you think of big resettlement cities, you think of Dallas, Texas, or Los Angeles, or Baltimore, something like that. But there are refugees here in Greenville, and they actually are resettled through that group, World Relief, that I just mentioned. So one method that pretty consistently works for church groups is to form a team of church members and to then partner with an agency like World Relief. So for Greenville ARP, almost exactly a year ago, we formed a team of church members, different ages, different stages of life, different interests, but we all wanted to serve. And so we formed what's called a Good Neighbor team. And then through World Relief, we were matched with a newly arriving refugee. He's a young man from Southeast Asia. He's separated from his family and really had no idea where he was when he landed. Our team received training from World Relief, and then we were there to meet him at the airport the night he arrived. And it's been our privilege to walk alongside him this past year as he has done things like learning about taxes and why, like, here's his paycheck, but, it's not as much as he thought because of taxes, and here's how to budget. Taking him to get his Social Security card and now applying for a green card. So we're just walking alongside him, and we have the support of this resettlement agency to help us when we have questions we don't know how to answer.
Well, that sounds amazing. Great example. Now, I know I've talked to you about this thing in Dallas that's going on this summer for young people. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about what's going on. And I know from what you told me, I'm very excited about it. Tell us a little bit, and if you're a young person or even a college student, how in the world can we get involved in this?
Yeah, so this summer, Outreach North America, or ONA, will be sponsoring a mission trip for college students and young adults, and we'll be going to Dallas, Texas to serve refugee kids there for a week. Last year, 2018, was our first trip, and it was a wonderful experience, and we're super excited to be going back. And in this week, Brent, it's actually in a lot of ways similar to what we did at Appalachia. So the Appalachia mission trip was a good training for me going into this situation because we do basically vacation Bible school plus some educational focus, so math and reading lessons for refugee kids from the Middle East, from Africa, from Asia, and there's hundreds of them. And so they need a lot of help. They bring teams in this summer. We're serving with a group called For the Nations Refugee Outreach in Dallas. And it's really an incredible opportunity to get to put names and faces with the refugee crisis. I think one thing that's easy to do when you talk about refugees is to talk about really kind of mind-numbing numbers like 25 million. And that doesn't really mean anything to us because we don't know how to process that. But when you start talking about individuals and you have the image in your head of one kid that you're able to come to know and love in the space of a week, and you're able to serve them, and you realize how much that child has been through, how much that child's family has been through, it really helps us to have compassion for refugees and learn how, going back home after that week, we could then find ways to serve refugees in our hometown too.
Well, it's been awesome to talk to you. I think you really opened my eyes, and I think a lot of other people's, on this amazing ministry to refugees. Can you tell us a little bit how we can get in touch with you, website, emails? We'd appreciate that if you could share.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Brent. It's a privilege, and I'd love to talk to you more about it and to anyone who might be listening. You can email me at egriffin@arpsynod.org. You can also find my contact information at www.ona-arp.org. And my name and contact information are on there. So I'd love to hear from our churches and from our church members and help them find ways that they could serve refugees living in their area.
Is there any website that you guys have so far?
We have a Refugee Ministry page, and there is a page specifically for that Dallas mission trip, and they are on the ONA website, which again is ona-arp.org.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And we look forward to hearing from many like you yourself. We are here to help the church, and we are thankful for Eleanor being with us today.
Thank you so much, Brent.
All right. Thank you.